An increasingly sophisticated threat ecosystem, highlighted by several high-profile data breaches, has raised cybersecurity to a board-level issue. Ponemon Institute estimates that cybercrime cost U.S. companies an average of $12.7 million in 2014. So how can IT organizations get their arms around this growing cyber threat and decrease risk across the entire enterprise? Hello, thanks for joining us today. My name is Rob O'Regan. I'm Director of Content Marketing Strategy for IDG's Strategic Marketing Services Group and the Community Manager for the Enterprise CIO Forum, which is sponsored by HP. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Scott Angelo, Global CIO for K&L Gates, an international law firm with more than 2,000 lawyers across 5 continents. As Global CIO, Scott is responsible for strategic technology planning and direction, architecture, operations, business resilience, and cybersecurity. Scott previously served as Corporate Vice President and CIO for Diebold, Inc. But his path to the office of the CIO was one less traveled. His career followed the technical security and risk management track, where he held a variety of senior technology management positions, including roles as Chief Security Officer and Chief Information Security Officer with Ernst Young, DARPA, NASA's Special Programs Office, and McDonnell Douglas. Scott also served as a military intelligence officer in the U.S. Army Reserve from 1986 through 2001. We're fortunate to have Scott as a guest today as we talk about IT security issues and tap into his extensive experience around complex data privacy and regulatory compliance issues in high transactional business environments. Welcome, Scott.
Hello, Rob. Thanks.
Scott and I will chat for the next half hour or so. We'll leave some time at the end for audience Q&A, so please submit your question using the box on the right of your screen. You can also leave comments and engage in dialogue in the comments section of the lower area of the page. If you're commenting via Twitter, please use the hashtag CIOchat. So Scott, let's start with a basic question. A lot of people believe that security is an IT problem and the tech team's responsibility until something happens, and then all of a sudden it's a business issue. How do you get everyone in sync before a problem arises?
So Rob, it's a basic question. It's a classic dichotomy, or maybe I should say the duality of good and evil, right? And I probably would answer this question different 5 years ago than I would today, but still there's always those constraints and competing initiatives of security, or the balance I should between security and even operational side of IT, and then certainly the value that you provide then to the business. And it's always then, or I should say, never appreciated as much as when there is some type of security incident, and then security is your best friend. But you know, that's obviously a roller coaster that has smoothed out a lot over the years, and that's why I mentioned the answer 5 years ago from today. I think that as security has evolved, it's certainly raised up the value chain within organizations, especially organizations where security is important for a variety of reasons, regulatory compliance. I think that has smoothed out, quite honestly. But how you would smooth it out, or how you used to have to smooth it out in the old days, was a lot of security education and awareness, just good old-fashioned sales.
Got it. You say it's smoother now than it was, but I assume there still must be some roadblocks in terms of bringing those two sides together and getting them in sync.
Well, there is, but again, it has smoothed out, and it's the competing resources, right? That often, and again, the way to overcome those constraints is education and awareness, and taking the time to answer why before it's ever asked, and that's, at least with me, that has always resonated well with both the operational side of IT and as well as the business. But you also have to be balanced, certainly, and understand that you have to provide pragmatic types of solutions, which then over time smooth those types of issues out.
That makes a lot of sense. Along those lines, there's a lot of discussion lately about how security is becoming a board-level issue. So how should CIOs and CSOs handle those top-level discussions to ensure that security becomes a core element of corporate strategy?
So, Rob, that's a great follow-on question, and again, the answer is one that has evolved significantly, and I would say that all security professionals should be excited because they truly do have a seat at the table right now, and there's a number of reasons why that has happened. One I kind of briefly just touched on at the last answer, and that was security has risen up the value chain, and it has become almost a table stake, and depending on what type of industry that you're in, more so. I think that the biggest thing right now is to keeping that seat at the table, and how you're going to do that and answer ultimately the question that you asked is by providing timely, concise, and actionable information to the board. And you're going to be able to do that, more efficiently and effectively by understanding the business. That's where security professionals need to become more like businessmen. Understand the business, understand their part of that value chain, and that will keep you there. That will involve you then in strategy, and that will go a long way to solving a lot of issues that you kind of went back to the first question, and how do you smooth those things out.
Got it. So let's dig into the technical and governance issues a little bit. In a 2014 survey by KPMG, more than half of the respondents reported that data loss is their biggest challenge to doing business in the cloud. Is business more risky and less secure in a cloud-based environment?
So that is the million-dollar question right now, Rob.
Sure.
So I would say I'm going to break that down into two things. Is it more risky? I would say potentially, or if you force me to say yes or no, I would say yes. And the reason for it being more risky is the cloud is what I would refer to as a jackpot. So there's more impetus on a bad guy to try to want to get into a cloud. But on the flip side of that, it doesn't have to be less secure. Does that make sense? I mean, they're using the same types of technologies for the most part that we are, but they certainly have larger budget. They should have larger opportunities to staff the latest and greatest, not just from a human perspective, but from a controls perspective. So it does not have to be less secure. So those two things don't necessarily relate to one another. However, that does seem to be the constraint. People automatically jump to the conclusion that cloud is synonymous with insecurity, and I would challenge that. And it's just like any company, right? There are large companies that get broken into. Well, it doesn't even have to be large organizations that get broken into almost daily right now. That has a lot more to do with their focus, dedication, and attention to putting a program in place, and less to do with the risk, so to speak.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So as a follow-on to that, how can you be sure that a cloud services provider that you're looking at has implemented better than adequate security standards and is able to enforce these policies? Is it insisting on access to audits? Are there other things you should be doing to kind of ensure that they're providing the level that you require?
Well, Rob, that's exactly the case. I'm not one that believes that you can transfer your risk to your cloud provider. So you better make sure that you perform the necessary level of due diligence, and that's really going to be driven by the type of data that you are enabling them to, or you're asking them to protect, so to speak. So I don't care. Pick a framework. Make sure that they are, or you do an assessment with respect to that. Make sure that they are meeting the requirements that you feel are necessary, And sometimes that might even be made a little easier because there may be some type of prescriptive framework that you have to use, the same one that you're using. So whether it's coming down from PCI or GLBA or HIPAA or you name it, but due diligence is an absolute, and I would say depending on the risk level, again, risk level determined by the data, not by that particular provider, but the data that you're going to be housing there is going to determine how just in depth that due diligence is. But certainly a right to audit clause should always be in every one of those contracts.
Okay, great. In terms of some of those kind of checklist items, one of the first steps in creating a security plan is building an effective security policy. This is regardless of whether you're looking at cloud services or other pieces of your network. It sounds obvious, but what are some of the things that you need to include in even the most basic policy?
So the policy is it's almost the story of the chicken, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? And in a perfect ideal world, the first thing that should happen with respect to a security policy and a plan, you should do a risk assessment, and based on your acceptable risks, based on your compliance and regulatory requirements, that should then be the baseline for what your policy is, and your policy then should drive your plan and your program. That's the compliance piece of it. But you get down to the basics of a policy. You need to outline the purpose of that policy. And a lot of times policies, unfortunately today, you build a plan first and a policy comes in after the fact, and it's reactive. It's in response to an issue that you're having right now or an emergency, and now you're saying thou shalt not do. And then you hope that your plan or your program is in place to address the compliance piece of that policy, making sure that people are, so the policy is kind of the guardrails. Your risk assessment determines how wide or narrow that guardrail is, and then your program tries to keep people inside of those guardrails, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned some of the kind of the reactive policy making that goes on. What are some of the other mistakes that you see in organizations that are developing these types of policies?
I think that probably the biggest challenge with policies is probably the lack thereof. And then probably with respect to the policies that they do have, and regardless of whether they're a good policy or not so good policy, it's the compliance piece of that. Who's monitoring, and then what are the for lack of a better term, the disciplinary actions that would go into place. Because if you're not willing to monitor the effectiveness of a policy, then the only thing you're going to do is breed contempt, and then that just has it creates other issues for your overall security your program.
Got it. In terms of the mobile trend that we're seeing out there, mobile is obviously affecting the way that companies interact with their customers, with their partners, with their employees. Are existing security tools able to keep up with that shift in terms of the way we communicate and collaborate with other people in the chain?
Well, it certainly challenges that, right? And I would say just like new risks and let's say threats, emerging threats and or vulnerabilities, security is always one step behind. It's policy and controls to enforce those policies are always, it's a catch-up game even on this space. The commercialization or consumerization of products where people, that becomes their way of life, and they want that to be the same as Monday through Friday. 8 to 5 or whatever the case might be. That creates a challenge, and we're not always ready to support that. Consumables weren't necessarily built with an enterprise management focus in mind. And a classic example has been for years now mobile device management, right?
Sure.
Everyone started to use the iPhones, the Androids, you name it, and they wanted to use that same phone for work. They didn't want to have to carry a BlackBerry then. So that created challenges for us. Technology then had to catch up, and then that's a great case for the only thing you may have had as a control was a policy, an acceptable use policy, which I think every company needs to have, saying that you can't do something, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to enforce it.
Got it. We're just kind of tick through a list of challenges here. Another one potentially is big data. A lot of these data analytics efforts have popped up, kind of on a pilot basis or in individual departments. Is there an additional security risk around these types of patchwork deployments of big data and analytics that are kind of raising the bar on kind of the security potential vulnerabilities a little bit?
So first, let me say I love the big data space. I'm huge. I want to embrace analytics as I believe most organizations and CIOs and hopefully even CISOs want to. But it absolutely creates opportunities for potential issues. And first and foremost, I would say it's introducing new technologies, and often open source databases and tools, specifically with respect to big data and all of those tools. And security wasn't a secondary and or even tertiary thought when they were developing these things, and often these are getting thrown into an environment, especially if you don't have a strong SDLC, change management type of program, and that will introduce issues. I would say another challenge with just big data and analytics in general, it's going to change the way security looks in general. The old, what's the best way to put this? Perimeter-centric security. It's going to, weaken that significantly, and security, instead of being, let's just say, endpoint-centric, is absolutely going to have to be data-centric. And that, what I really mean by that is, it's going to transcend perimeters, especially with the larger organization that you are. If you're global, that just absolutely puts on a greater strain. So the lack of security built into the products, the fact that it is going to change the perimeter, and then the last thing that probably makes those first two even more important is the fact that end users want constant and flexible access.
Right.
So that just puts a strain on those first two things. And at the end of the day, it is the right thing for business. Unlocking the value of all this data that we've all had for all these years and we've only been able to use 20% of, that makes no sense. So we have to embrace it. Now the answer to that is to have a great security team and or partners and get them involved early. And if we go all the way back to your first two questions, if you've established a trust and a great rapport with the ops side of the house, or in this case maybe it's your development side of the house, they know that they need to bake you in. So you're involved from day one. The business knows that you need to be baked in. The board knows that. So there are a number of different checkpoints, so to speak, that would prevent it from ever becoming half-baked, and now all of a sudden security is brought in, but you're not allowed to stop the process. And hopefully that made sense. A little bit of a ramble, but it's something I feel strong about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you've touched on a good piece of it from kind of the people side of it and the policy side of it. What about the tools themselves? Are the current tools that are out there, are they flexible and smart enough to adapt to these kind of changing conditions and the changing demands that users have on the data in order to keep it secure?
You know, I think that that some are, but just like I said, you know, this new wave or these new wave of the way business are unlocking value are putting a true strain on our current security architectures, which are making them, in some cases, absolutely obsolete. In some cases, they're weakening them, which then obviously presents opportunities for companies to come up with solutions. But just like your question a few back about, we are always a step behind, and the business never wants to slow down. That's back to that flexibility, and they want it right now. It's a catch-up game. The tools have to evolve. They have to get better. They have to be data adaptive, and they need to be as mobile as the end users want to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of being a step behind, we're seeing a lot now about the Internet of Things. You know, the more and more devices are being connected, things like internet-capable TVs or home security systems, smart cars, and so on. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the potential impact of those things on enterprise security and how security teams should be thinking about the Internet of Things.
So, you know, again, the common theme obviously is risk management, understanding the risks associated with any particular action. In this particular action, the Internet of Things. You know, it was one thing to IP-enable devices, products, you name it, for monitoring purposes, and let's just say in the utility space, right? That's been common, and that's been going on. It's becoming more and more internet-enabled, where you know it's a cost savings, right? And it's more accurate. I can go and I can see. I can check a gas sensor out in the field because you know I don't want to send a guy out there anymore, inclement weather, regardless. And that's one thing, and that creates certain security risk, but you know, on the scale of things, is that really that big? I don't know. That would be a risk decision to be made. But when we start to add controls, and that's the next phase, right? Now I no longer, I've seen the value of connecting these devices. Now I want to do more. I want to unlock more value. I don't want to just monitor. I want to be able to control. I want to be able to turn something on or turn something off. And now, as you can see on the risk side, you know, it goes up exponentially depending on what we have enabled. Whether it be a privacy issue with a camera in someone's house, that's more of a consumer type thing, or a sensor out on a natural gas well. Where we're trying to, you know, gauge the actual flow. Certainly increases risks and security issues.
Got it. Got it. Want to talk about kind of the software component as well. There's a lot of vulnerabilities that are constantly identified within software, within the code itself. Obviously, there are things you can do to make the code more secure, and there are QA solutions available to test the security of those applications you're creating, especially in sensitive and heavily regulated areas like healthcare. But as companies restructure to be more agile and expand that team to do things like DevOps and things like that, where you know more of that development, more of that testing is done in the cloud, is there more of a possibility that cracks might appear and potential problems could go even undetected even longer until it's too late?
Well, if the question is really about should we, is there still a great need to make sure that code is written securely? Absolutely. Yeah. And if my philosophy on that, if it's worth developing, it's worth making sure that it's secure, making sure that you bake secure coding practices in the entire life cycle of that development. And if it's not worth doing that, then it's not worth developing.
Right.
I mean, so that's something that's very near and dear to me, and I think although the issue is way more complex than that answer, at the end of the day, if it's worth developing, it's worth making sure that it's secure.
Are there changes to the process that you need to make where it's not just, you develop the code and then you toss it over to the fence to the security folks? Do you need to make that more of an integrated process where security is involved from the get-go?
Well, it's a highly iterative process. Mm-hmm. and again, going back, your security team has to have that trust and rapport that's already created with, if you're doing in-house development. And if you're not, that's one of those due diligence types of activities. If you are going to outsource something for development, then you want to see how is secure coding being built into their products. But that's also another thing. 10 years ago, I would have had a whole different answer. I'm not saying that we've 100% corrected it, but there's certainly we've come a long way on the development side of making sure the code is more secure. The tools, actually, even for testing security, have evolved significantly. So there's a lot of help and assistance. There's frameworks, there's organizations, there's more white papers that you can read on the topic. So if you don't do it, it's your own fault. And again, if it's worth developing, it's worth making sure that it's secure.
Got it. I've got a final wrap-up question I'm gonna toss out at you, Scott. But let's take a couple of questions from the audience first. I'm seeing a few come in. So first question's a pretty basic one. Maybe it's not a simple answer, but it's a simple question. In your mind, should the CISO report to the CIO or to the board or to some other senior executive in the organization?
So Rob, that is I said your first question was classic. This has been a debate for years, and I say it all depends.
Right.
As a CSO and as a CISO, I've reported to ops, I've reported to the CIO, I've reported to the CFO. It's less a factor of who you report to than it is how dynamic are you in getting the message across to the board. Now, I'm not going to say for a second that if your reporting structure is a constraint, then it's probably a personality type issue versus a structural. I've had CFOs that were very, very easy to work through, I would say, because I think that's a proper statement, and I've had some that weren't so easy. So it's not so much, there's no silver bullet for that if you automatically report to the CEO that you're going to be more effective. And I'll give a counter to that, because I think a lot of people are trying to say that that's the case. Well, I'll tell you what, if you are just a technical CISO and you do not have a tremendous amount of business acumen and truly understand the value and are able, that CEO is probably not going to listen to you for very long, and you will be put down somewhere else in the organization. So I have never had an issue. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think people get wrapped around the structural versus it really is it really has everything to do with the type of person that the security officer is and who he is reporting to.
Right. So are there specific skills that either you've developed over time or that you feel are most helpful in terms of those communication? Is it just those softer communication skills, or are there other harder skills that CSOs should be focusing on so they get that audience and they get that attention that they need to get?
So a great question, and it is the softer skills. It's soft skills. It's business acumen. If you don't understand the business that you're trying to secure, that's the fastest way to lose your seat at the table. But then you need to be able to translate, and you need to translate in very concise, timely, and actionable ways. Otherwise, you just, the higher you get up, the closer you get to the CEO at that table, the more concise you better be able to be, and that really boils down to excellent translation, excellent communication skills, and phenomenal business acumen, and has very little to do with technical skills.
Yep. So keep it simple. No acronyms for those board presentations.
I've always said keep it very, very simple, and this is a true story. Reporting to the board. I went in. Typically you'll be in a queue, and this is when I was the CSO, and my time came up, and I was supposed to have 15 minutes, and I get up and I sit next to my boss, who was the CFO, and there was no real issue with that reporting structure, and he slid a little sticky in front of me, and it said 4 minutes. and I whispered over to him, I said, am I up in 4 minutes? And he said, no, you have 4 minutes. And you need to be able to make sure that you make the most out of that 4 minutes. And that's I've shared that, it's a true story, shared that story with others, and they've maybe not such a drastic thing, but it resonated with them. And you need to be able to get and make the most out of that 4 minutes, so that you're going to get invited to that table over and over again. And that's by making sure that you can unlock value, and become a table stake.
Yep.
I will say the most effective security officer I have ever been in any organization is as being the CIO.
Really interesting.
For whatever that.
No, that's good. That's good. A little more technical question here from one of our viewers today. How does software-defined data centers impact security?
Can you repeat that question?
How does software-defined data centers impact security?
So if I'm interpreting that correct, so software-defined data centers or software-defined networks,
Yep.
Almost kind of hybrid types of technologies or hybrid clouds. I think that has a significant impact on security in a positive way. So, and if I'm not answering the question correctly, let me know. But so I'll take the example of a hybrid cloud type thing, where that is now enabling us to go from a private cloud to that public cloud and meet the requirements of either statutory requirements that maybe are based on location, where let's just say I'm operating in a geographic region that says my data can't leave my confines, or a corporate GLBA, so you have a financial services client that says the data that I'm entrusting to you can't leave the confines of your organization. So the hybrid piece allows us to work around that and give us almost a single pane of glass, right? To use in sticking with the cloud, to use the right cloud at the right place for the right work requirement, whether that be a data piece of, we're developing data, or a service. Hopefully that answered that.
Yep. No, that's good. That's good. We've talked a lot today, Scott, about kind of messaging up to the senior leadership and the board. What about the messaging down piece? What's your approach to security awareness and making sure that people are aware of, and educated about the risks and the steps they need to take, kind of take some ownership of that security piece across the organization?
So it's extremely important. The number one, the best control that you can ever have in any organization is to almost turn every employee into a security person, where they're at least thinking about it, they're at least questioning anomalies, they're at least taking a second glance, and the only way you're going to do that is through education and awareness. And a term that I've often used in our programs is, security is a team effort, but it's an individual responsibility. And when you really get that out, that goes a long way to securing any type of organization.
There's kind of a weakest link syndrome too, whether that's people or devices or processes or something on the edge out there there's something out there in your network that's the weakest link. How do you kind of manage around that and secure around what's perceived to be the most vulnerable part of your organization?
And I'll go back to a risk assessment.
Yeah.
Risk management is truly the key, the linchpin, so to speak, to everything. That's how and focusing on the data, right? What's how do I classify my data? What's the data that needs to have additional controls on it, and how do I do that? Right, and so understanding how that data enters my organization, where it's created, where it resides, how it flows, how it exits, that's all part of the risk management piece. That's what enables us to not just be accurate but precise. And there is a difference, right? About accuracy and precision, and you're only going to get precise by more aggressive risk management types of processes in your organization.
Got it. So is there one security control that you would single out that's often overlooked but that provides significant value to an organization in the fight against cyber risks?
So there are. You almost hate to just pick one, because they're going to say, oh, well, you missed these five.
Yeah, sure.
There are obviously, in no particular order, a number of things. If you have remote, if you're allowing remote access, I don't care how strong your passwords are. If you're not doing two-factor authentication, you're asking for problems. If you have a global organization, if you're not doing major network segmentation, you're asking for a problem. So those are, if you don't do SSL decryption, you're asking for problems. So those are some basic things. But often I still think that people are laggards with respect to enabling those. But one that a lot of people don't do, and there is significant value, at least right now, and at least for the next year or so, the bad guys always get smart to our things, and that would be how we manage uncategorized or unclassified domains, so that you don't just automatically allow your enterprise to interface with them, because when you think about phishing is a nightmare, right? And it's very difficult. There's no real tool to solve that. Well, the overwhelming majority of the sites, the links that they're trying to push you out to, are they're new, so they're unregistered, they're uncategorized. Well, putting a process in that just doesn't automatically allow you to go to one of those sites. So doing that, without getting into a lot of particulars about what that is, if you're a technical person out there, you'll understand at least the concept. That goes a long way and helping fight against phishing, at least at this point. And if you're not a real technical person, go to your security team and ask them, what are we doing with respect to managing access to these types of domains.
Got it, got it. Last question, Scott, kind of the big takeaway question. What advice would you give to a CIO or a security team that's charged with keeping an enterprise system lean, mean, and relatively clean from potential security risks?
The single thing I would say, and it's again with respect to risk management, focus more on the threat side of the house versus the vulnerability part of that equation. You know, the classic risk equation is you have to have a vulnerability and then there has to be a threat to exploit that vulnerability. And going back to that accuracy and precision, if you focus on vulnerabilities, that allows you to be kind of accurate. You're kind of in the space because at least you know what your technology are, you know what the vulnerabilities are, they're very, very well documented, etc. But focusing on threat, what are the threats to your organization, the type of organization that you are, the type of data that you have, and the methods of which those threat actors are trying, that allows you to be more precise. And when you can be precise, now all of a sudden you can do those other things you said, run lean, mean, and have the biggest potential impact on the overall security risks. Focus on threat.
Great, great. So a few notes as we start to wrap up here. This interview will be available on demand shortly after the live session ends. There's additional resources that I think you can see on the page. Please check those out if you'd like. Our next CIO Live event is scheduled for October 15th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern with Ed Mahone. He's the CIO of Kent State University, and we'll be talking about cloud computing. Scott, thanks so much. It's been great having you here today. We really appreciate your time and insights.
Rob, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks also to our sponsor, HP, and thank you most of all for joining us today. For IDG, I'm Rob O'Regan. Thanks.